Welcome to the Griefy Girls Book Club, where every month we dive into a griefy read. From memoirs to biographies to fantasy, romance, and beyond. If it touches on grief, it's fair game. We're your hosts. I'm Kendall Rogers.
And I'm Rachel Dwyer. You might know us from our podcast, Two Girls with Grief. For us, reading is both healing and a powerful way to explore grief. So we knew it was time to give it the attention it truly deserves. Join us as we unpack our favorite moments, chat about upcoming reads, and even host interviews with guest authors. And you can bet we'll be yapping about our ever-growing TBR piles too.
So, whether you're here for the books, the banter, or a little bit of both, we're so glad to have you with us. Let's read, reflect, and grow in our grief together. Welcome to the Two Girls with Grief Book Club. We might laugh or we might cry, but we always read.
Book club where we might make ourselves cry, but sometimes read books that are fun, that involve grief, like the beach read that we're reading right now. And we're going through chapters 11 through 15 in this episode. So hopefully you've been following along because it's starting to get steamy up in these chapters.
I'm loving the spice as we gradually get further into the book.
I love the buildup and just it starts with like they're starting their segue like not dates, which I feel like end up of course being like date, like it leads into that. But one thing that she did mention that had to do with her grief a little bit, but also just like about reading, which I feel like we really relate to, is that she said what made her fall in love with reading is feeling like that it's a new world that was being spun like a spider web around you and you couldn't move until the whole thing revealed itself. And I feel like we both love reading. We both read a ton of books. And I feel like especially in grieving, sometimes you do need to experience like another world when your world feels really sad.
Yeah.
And I think I read a lot of happy books. Kendall went the opposite direction. Like whatever you choose to read, um, you might need to like read someone's sadder reality to make yourself feel better. There's no right or wrong way for that. So, but yeah, I thought that was a really relatable line that like, that's such a great thing that you can do when you just can't get your world to look different than what it looks like at the time.
Yeah, I think there's something beautiful in whatever you read that when you read a book, you're transforming. You don't leave a book the same way you enter a book. And I think even if you're grieving and you feel like so stuck in life and you feel like just everything sucks, you still are changing when you read a book. Like you don't stay the same. And I think like that's such the beauty. And I think like a huge part of healing too, like if you're grieving and you love books, like I hadn't picked up in a book so long until I was grieving. And then to find that it was like a catalyst to help me open my mind, see a bigger perspective on things. And I think like that's why you and I are very like passionate about this, like both reading, but
Yeah.
also like talking about grief as well.
Yeah. And the books have opened kind of different outlet for it that makes you like think of different memories. I mean, Crying in H Mart, our first book, was hit a lot of emotions and a lot of memories that I was unexpecting. This one's definitely more lighter that has grief elements, but also has like the fun, datey kind of elements as well. But another key thing I feel like in her grief process that she did mention in the book was mourning the years that her mom spent in the hospital and
Yeah.
like how, so many years, like hospital visits, her mom lost her hair, lying sick on the couch. And I know we both dealt with sick family members. And so I was thinking that too, especially like with my sister, my mom, like my dad, like just how much time got taken from them, not even from them passing away, but them having to deal with sickness and hospital visits and just the scariness of that. Like no one likes going to the hospital. No one likes running tests and doing all this stuff. So, yeah, I definitely think it was a really relatable part of the book. Did you catch that when you were audio reading, listening?
Yeah, it definitely hits a tender point. And I do appreciate when people would bring up the parts of grief that are not spoken about as much. And you and I call it pre-grief, but and Shout out to the social media grief community, both on like Instagram and TikTok. Like I'm learning so much about my own grief. I'm learning like the vocabulary, how to talk about this. And I can't remember the word, but they're like you and I call it
I've seen people say like anticipatory grief is one
yeah,
of
I
them.
think yeah,
There's
it
a
was
few
that.
terms. I mean, I think that the fact of the matter is no one knows everything about grief.
Right,
Everyone's trying
yeah.
to come to terms
Learning.
with it. We called it pre-grief. You might call it anticipatory grief. I think there's another term floating around. Like no one is a pro. Like you can study grief and you will be a pro because everyone's different. It's just a weird, weird thing to experience. So
Yeah. And I think with you and our experiences with that pre-grief and that it's that hospital period, like that comes along with its own trauma as well. And
yeah,
so it does like same thing with the previous book. Like it touches on the hospital visits being like really
yeah,
hard. And like I know you and I have talked in another episode where like the beeping I heard from the heart monitor, like that's
yeah,
something I can't get out of my brain sometimes. Like
yeah.
when I
Or the
hear it
noises of
again,
like going flat. That's
yeah,
the worst noise.
yeah,
Like just knowing that they're gone. Like, yeah, there's so much trauma just like hospitals and yeah, the experience waiting to hear news of like what's happening or getting calls. It's there's a lot with that you have to deal with that yeah, people don't talk about. It's worse than them just passing away. It's everything that led up to it.
right.
If you deal with like any sickness or anything. Obviously
Yeah.
there's different, different types of passing away, but to move on to some happier elements in the book, I love that for their not dates, she took him to a carnival. She said it was the perfect place to fall in love.
It
And
was.
I don't think I've ever gone to a carnival with a guy. But I feel like growing up, I don't think that people do it as much now or care about it. Feels like waste to like PG, but like sitting next to a boy on like is it a Ferris wheel or not Ferris wheel, like that thing that like circles up. Yeah. Sitting next to a boy in a Ferris wheel, I feel like that is what I think about when it's just like cute, PG, fun, dating. So I thought it was cute. And she's like, it's a perfect inspiration for you to write a love romance story. So I thought that was really cute.
So eager to hear how they interpret each other's genre in writing their books because, like, yeah, exactly. This carnival was great fodder for a romance. But through his lens, I'm interested to see how, like, what it
How
actually comes
what it
out
takes it
as.
into. Yeah, I mean, he's such like the negative Nancy guy. But there was something cute in there because they were like bickering and he mentioned like he brought up like every guy that she dated in college.
Yeah.
And it's like it's one of the things where like a guy notices you more than you think he does sometimes. And like she had a crush on him, but she didn't think he did. But like the things that he's revealing, like you wouldn't notice all that and remember it years later unless you're interested in her. So I think it's like kind of starting to open her eyes a little bit, like, oh, you liked me, or like there was interest there. Like I'm surprised you remembered.
Yeah, it's interesting how, like, when we started, he didn't even act like he acted like he didn't even know her. And then now we're like,
Yeah.
he's listing off all her previous boyfriends.
And I feel like that's all that girls want. Not like it's like they say like to be loved is to be seen. And I feel like Gus is like slowly revealing those things, those like secret information that like it means a lot that like you notice those things, you remember them like years later. I think that's super cute to me. I always
Yeah.
get giddy over those things. One thing that she mentioned, I think they started talking about when he mentioned her ex-boyfriends and she referred to as like the golden boy.
Hmm.
And it's something that we talk about like on the podcast a bunch is like either friendships or relationships having like breakups because of grief. And she mentioned that her and her boyfriend broke up because he didn't know how to support her because they're always this like happy couple that did all these things. They hosted, the perfect little couple. He didn't like that she was sad and that she was like crying and didn't want to get out of bed and he didn't know how or maybe just didn't care to support that version of her. He like only wanted the cookie cutter perfect partner.
Yeah.
And the line that really got me where she said, he was like, you're not yourself anymore. And she was like, no, you're wrong. I am myself, but I stopped trying to glow in the dark for him or for anyone else. So basically, like trying to be this perfect version of ourselves to fit him and to fit them as a couple. And she wasn't able to do that because she was grieving and,
Yeah.
going through all this stuff. Especially like not just grieving his death, but like that relationship of like finding out he had a mistress and and then like, it affecting her relationship with her mom that she also was really close to. So all those things she wasn't able to like then be the cheerleader for him and the happy person. And I thought that was super relatable just because everyone experiences that and you hear so often that like couples break up because of it because they don't know how to be there for you when you're sad and you're not this happy person.
And then all of a sudden you're grieving like a whole new thing. You're grieving a
Yeah.
relationship, and then like how do you survive the loss of somebody and then the lack of a relationship that you depended on?
Yeah. And I think a clear kind of thing she mentions, maybe this chapter or the next, was like you want your partner to be the first person that you want to call when something bad happens, like your dad passing away. And she said that he wasn't the first person that she wanted to call. So I feel like that was kind of a big indicator, like that he wasn't the right one. And I think it's also that kind of thought process that you don't really think about sometimes until something bad happens. And then your mind just automatically goes to the first person you think of. And that I think that's why we talk about like grief so often makes you rethink your friendships and just who matters to you and all those different things. So I like that that was like pointed out in the book. Did you
Yeah.
notice that when you're listening to that chapter?
Yeah, and kind of along the same lines when she mentioned that she wasn't feeling about like when he was asleep, like that he was like the most perfect person for her. And she was like, I would look at him and I didn't feel anything for him. And it wasn't like she was living up for the image of the perfect relationship, but it wasn't fulfilling to her, especially when she needed like the previous boyfriend the most. And I think back to the point of him like mentioning that you're not yourself anymore. Well, like, duh, when you're grieving,
Yeah.
the person who's grieving is also not feeling like themselves anymore. Like they don't even know who they are and they're like confused about how to deal with the situation. And if it's your first loss and like you can speak to many losses after that, but like you're changing, you're catalyzing, and yeah, you don't know how to communicate that to somebody unless they experience it of like, yeah, I don't know who I am anymore. I just know the sadness is real. The sadness is coming from within me. And if that can't be accepted or, supported, then like, how else can this person be a part of your life if they can't accept this, like, fundamental part of you?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a reflection of even just like dating culture now is like you may envision the partner of like who you think you need to be with, who and you get petty. Like I keep seeing videos of like, oh, he gave me the ick, and it's just like some silly thing, and it's like everyone will give you the ick for something, like, but you can't like, I need him to be tall, this hair color, this color eyes. I need to have this job, like I feel like when you do that, you're not thinking about the most smart things. It's like, are you going to be alone in your partnership? Are they going to be there for you when shit gets hard? And I think that's the most important thing that people need to think about. And I'm glad that that was kind of mentioned in the book of just her reevaluating that and like realizing she was with him for like 7 years and just like not actually happy in that relationship,
Yeah, and
which is a
snaps to
crazy
that,
time.
snaps to
Yeah.
evaluation, snaps to doing what you need to do for your life.
It's never too late to figure out what you want.
Yeah,
When you,
read.
yeah. But the next chapter, and Kendall's reading it through or listening to through audio, and I'm reading it through chapters. So I feel like I'm directing the chapter just to kind of encapsulate like what's actually happening in this chapter. So Kendall's just kind of reading, like listening in as like a continuous story.
And a
Um,
review for the book, it's so good. It's such easy listening, easy reading. Because I read half the book in one day, and I was like, oh shit, I gotta stop or I'm gonna read the whole freaking book in one day. I'm not gonna know what happens when we talk about this in 4 weeks. So I am a little far ahead, but it's just because it's that good. I've really enjoyed it, and Emily Henry is just like a phenomenal writer.
Yeah, so I'm trying to organize these notes to rein Kendall into a chapter so she remembers what happened in each one. But the
True.
chapter 12 opens up where um I think it's chapter 12 or my ending in chapter 11 where basically she met like parents met at a carnival, and I think that's probably why she chose that as their first date, and maybe even like consciously, like as much as she's doubting her parents' love, that's something that she idolized, something that she looked up to. And then she's like, I think he said that's cute, it's like a typical love story type thing. And she's like, no, my dad cheated on my mom with cancer. So like it wasn't actually a cute story. And I think that's really hard to deal with when grieving. It's like being mad at someone that's no longer here.
Yeah, especially when, like, I know I do this with like my own dad, and I have to check myself and be like, no, your dad was a real person. Like, I
Yeah.
definitely put him up on a pedestal now that he's passed, and I just like I will overlook some of these like flaws of his because it just feels weird to acknowledge the flaws after someone's passed. But I have to check myself and be like, no, your dad was not perfect. He did have like his own quirks and his own flaws. And nothing like
Yeah.
detrimental, but like it's very easy to want to, I think, I don't know the word, but like put the person up on a pedestal and think like they were so
Yeah.
great and flawless when like
That's all you
at
hear
the end of the
about
day,
at funerals. Yeah.
yeah, they're still a person and they still had their own things, and regardless, that's still okay to like recognize them as a person. You can still, I think, romanticize the idea of the person if that helps. Like I'm not gonna be like, don't do that. But
Yeah.
for me, I had to like kind of check myself at some point and be like, okay, I talk about like my dad as if he's perfect, but he did have little flaws that, at the time bothered me when he was alive. So like that's just
Yeah.
like
And that's
reality
just
of
life. Yeah.
things. Yeah.
No one's perfect. It's not like your parents won't ever annoy you.
Yeah.
That's
And
just
this is clearly
reality.
what she's going through with her own dad is like she has all these great memories with her dad. And then this huge glaring thing that she's now having to reckon with. And I imagine that is really difficult.
Yeah. And this chapter, I think we mentioned it last chapter, but this is the actual chapter where Gus mentions the dedication on her book. And because I think of the carnival stuff, and the dedication is to my parents who are proof of faith's strong animatronic hand. And that's because her parents met at the carnival at an animatronic hand that like was getting prediction, and the dad waited. She was like swearing it was storm because her ticket got stuck. And then he went after her, and then their ticket said, her said, you will meet a handsome stranger, and his said, your story's about to begin. And so that's where the dedication came from. Super cute. Uh, People don't be like that anymore.
No. Where's the carnivals? This is actually carnival season right now, like fall.
I know. I've been to a few, but never with a guy actually. Carnival dreams never came.
Give Rachel a call her up, take her to a carnival.
Uh,
Let's get
yeah.
that off the bucket list.
Let's just check that off real quick. Um, but one thing that I do like about Gus, beyond, I mean, I feel like a lot of things, but I feel like she's kind of spiraling about it's not that cute. He cheated, blah, blah, blah. And he said that he really liked the dedication, like it really stuck with him. And she just like, well, it's fake. It didn't mean anything. And he said it wasn't a lie, but maybe a complicated truth, but
Yeah.
not a lie. And I feel like that is just kind of a good way to, I don't know, just life. I feel like you get so stuck on like what life is going to look like or how people are going to be. And the truth is that like life can take you 5,000 different directions, throw different things at you, and people are flawed, and you have to kind of find that balance of sometimes you expect someone to be perfect and just no one is. And I liked Gus's take on that. It wasn't perfect, but it's not like their love wasn't a lie. It still meant something. And even you learn about like the actual reason for the affair later on, but it's not clear cut. Not that I'm
Yeah.
a fan of cheating or anything, but
Well, and I think like
yeah,
as you get older, your idea and definition of love changes. And, like, where is it? There's like 7 different Latin words for love, and they all
yeah,
have a different attribute to different relationships. And so I think, like, while she's reckoning with this hard reality with her dad, Gus can acknowledge, like, the love was still there regardless. It just looks different than what you expected it to be.
yeah. And this is also the chapter where you learn about his backstory a little bit. His dad was like a POS. I think he might have been abusive or something. And he's talking about how he wanted, and his mom passed away when he was young, but before she passed away, he was always hoping for her to leave the dad and for them to run away. And he had that like fantasy that life was going to work out because his mom was going to save him. I don't know if it actually mentioned how she passed away, but he said that reality was learning like, oh, his mom could have left, but was never going to, and kind of being let down by that fact of like, you could have saved us. I had a bag packed. We could have lived a good life, but you stayed. And I think that's way more complicated. Obviously, you hear about, all those different stories. But as a kid, it's like you don't really understand the reasons why someone would stay in an abusive relationship. Way more layered than that, and psychological and all these things, financial manipulation. Like there's so many different reasons. And he mentioned the reason why he's so obsessed with this cult book is because he wanted to understand why the reasons people stay no matter the cost.
Yeah.
And I think that's him trying to deal with his trauma, childhood trauma, and like, you know, if my mom did it to our detriment, why do other people do it? And like Colts is obviously an extreme way to do it, but I feel like you get a better understanding of Gus as a character
Yeah.
in that.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about grief, and I think when just listening to other people talk about grief, whether it is complicated or not, grief and love go hand in hand, weirdly enough. And to have a relationship like he does with his mom, like clearly you love your parents, and then he's wanting her to leave out of, his probably his own safety. But then you're looking at the person who's supposed to save you, and they're trapped in that relationship. Now, whether that is, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to claim
Yeah.
anything. But, whether it's out of love or manipulation, sometimes you can't tell the difference when you're in it. And it's very easy to be on the outside and be like, well, if it was me, I would have
Yeah.
left a
I hate
long
that
time ago.
phrase because it's never true. It's like never.
Yeah, and I was like, if it was that easy, they would have. Like, if it was that easy for them to leave, then it would. And, I read a stat somewhere, like the times when, and I'll say it just for women in domestic abuse cases become very physically abused or worse, to the point where she might lose her life, is when she's trying to leave. That is how caustic that situation is, particularly in this case for women to leave a difficult relationship. Like, it might actually cost her life. And like, that's a very difficult thing to expect of people in tough relationships, and just be like, well, if you truly cared about your kid or you truly cared about yourself, you would have left. And it's like, it's not that cut and dry. It's not
Yeah.
that black or white.
It's not that easy. Another thing that she mentions about her parents in this chapter and kind of her being like this quirky, like weird girl was that she was the only child, but she said her parents watched her like choose the TV, like the most interesting thing that to exist. And that kind of inflated her ego and like what she was capable of. And I feel like my parents were like that too, in a sense that like, they always cheered me on and always, I was the best. I was gonna accomplish this and that. And that just like read that line with nostalgia of like, I miss that. Like of just people that believe in you
Yeah.
wholeheartedly for everything that you do. And the line that like got me was she said she thought home would always be a safe place where the three of us belonged. And we both talked about how when you lose people, like especially family members or level, whoever feels like home to you, home feels like a weird thing now because that safe place where you could rely on people and have people to catch you is gone. And so I read that line and I was like, oh, yeah, that's weird. I hate that.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. It's like, wow, the belief somebody had in you, and now you're like, who believes in me that much? Will anybody
Yeah.
ever believe in me as much as, like, in this case, her parents?
Yeah. Such a sweet thought. And I like throughout this chapter, especially the carnival, they're bickering and you
Oh,
see that,
banter is so good.
yeah. And I like how they're kind of throwing back like story plot lines. And January's actually putting in happy endings or like happy ending elements, which she was not able to do before. So I feel like her relationship with Gus and them opening up to each other has freed up mental space for her to like start to process things and think of things
Yeah.
differently and kind of unleash her creative mind again. And you see that kind of happening in this chapter. And then it ends with a super cute, like they go to see Dave at like some, I forgot what it is. It's like some restaurant, some chain restaurant, and they go to see this guy that's supposed to be in the cult, but he doesn't show up. And their share, I don't even remember what their banter was about or their conversation. And then all of a sudden, like their knees touch, and then Gus's hand kind of like grazes her knee, and then she kind of touches his hand, and then all of a sudden they're just like holding hands under the table and like not talking about it. And it's just like this cute, like she's like, it's like we're 16 and just like holding
Yeah.
hands and being awkward about it. And I was like, oh, that's so cute. Makes you giddy.
Makes me
Ah,
giddy.
sweet. Makes you feel like I'm a teenage girl. Yeah.
No, really, and I will that this whole book really just sums it up,
Yeah.
like, I was like, "Oh, this is what it feels like to, like, fall in love for the first time again."
Yeah. Have that like crush. And chapter 13 is like super dramatic. And I had to point this out to Kendall because she's listening to it. Chapter 13 is literally just the line I dreamed of Gus Everett and I need a shower. So I feel like that's kind of the start of like, okay, they're becoming this thing because she's pointing that out, like where
The level
she's
has been
having,
raised.
yeah, their friendship is crossing the lines. It's the first time anything's happened. So super cute. Chapter 14 enters with like her kind of figuring out about like the boundaries of like breaking down for friends to lovers, and which is like one of my
From
favorite tropes.
enemies to friends to lovers, we're just checking all the
Yeah,
boxes.
when they weren't really like they're like fake enemies, like like enemies to her, like her just jealousy, but like wanting him and feeling like he didn't like her, even though they had that night.
Mhm.
And actually, in the previous chapter, he did mention that he broke up with his girlfriend too because of their one night of like being handsy and dancing. So he was into it. He liked her. There was a thing. And she was like shocked. She's like, what does that mean? What do you mean that you broke up with her? Should
Yeah,
we
because it
like,
messes her whole timeline and trajectory up,
yeah,
'cause she had such a specific view of that night and the events that happened and led up to
yeah,
them having a little makeout sesh. And then for him to provide this one extra piece of context, she's like, whoa, this whole thing has now changed.
yeah. And a big thing not related to Gus that she mentions in that in chapter 14 that January mentions is she feels like people stopped checking on her. She just mentions like the calls haven't been coming in, and I feel like that's something that grievers can really relate to. That at some point people stop asking because they either because like, it's like they have their own lives and people move on. It's not the center of their world type of thing, but
Right.
also because people think that you're okay, like you just moved on. Like, oh, okay, I was there for a bit and they're done with it, so we just wrap that up and
Yeah. It's very hard because I remember this too. You get the flood of texts, the flood of calls, and I remember feeling like overwhelmed. Like I just could not respond to all of them because I couldn't even, at some point, I think I was just copying and pasting messages just to people because I was just like,
yeah,
I don't know what to say. And then, people will check it. But then, yeah, but I think, I don't know, 4 or 6 months, you might get a random out of the blue one. But by that point, that flood has stopped.
yeah,
And when people do reach out and they ask you, well, how are you doing? And like, what are you supposed to say? Like,
yeah,
I'm still doing shitty. Like, life still sucks. Like,
Yeah, I'm really
should I be
sad.
concerned? Like,
Yeah, and
so
yeah,
yeah, go
people
ahead.
don't get it. I was gonna say people don't get it,
Yeah.
and what are you supposed to say other than you're okay?
Yeah. I wish back then I felt empowered enough or confident enough. And I think I was only honest about how I was truly feeling, like with my own immediate family when they asked.
Yeah,
I think for other people,
it's a
I just
lot. Like,
it is a lot. And it's a lot to put on somebody if they're just doing like the flyby check-in and they're just like, "How are you doing?" And you're like,
yeah,
"Well, let me tell you, actually the last 4 days I haven't taken a shower." So
yeah. You're
how
like, I
in
haven't
depth do you want to
eaten.
go?
I didn't brush my teeth. Like, I
I don't know what
spent half the
day it
day in
is.
bed. Yeah. So yeah, I think people get really weirded out about just how it affects you in so many ways and they don't want to have those conversations. So I totally relate when she's like, her world felt empty and she was in this beautiful beach, by this beautiful beach, in this beautiful place, but she never really felt so alone. And like the Gus element was like making her feel less alone and whatever was happening with that, but she wasn't sure. And so she just went to the beach and started crying and she was sitting there and then a bird, I don't know if the bird pooping on her made her cry or she was already crying and the bird pooped. I can't remember what the time which one was first. Do you
Yeah, I
remember?
don't remember either, but it was honestly funny, like great comedic timing.
Yeah, and then it's where she turned around and Gus is just standing there like watching her cry and she's just like a bird pooped on me. She just like walked up to him and then he pulled her in for a hug and then he's like, that's a lot of poop. And it's like and it's like kind of comedic timing. And I feel like that's kind of what crying as a griever is. It's like you may be bawling 1 second and then like the next second something makes you laugh. And I think you really need that. Like your soul needs both sometimes. Like as sad as you get, you need that laughter. You need to allow that to still be there. So I thought that was good timing. And then they're just kind of hugging for a little bit. And then their date night happened, or their not date night, where they did a drive-in movie theater which is like
Another
also
super cute
another
thing.
super cute thing. Like, hello, that is so cute.
Totally. There's one here and it's like a double feature drive-in. It's very old school retro. So there's one near you. Go support your local drive-in
Yeah, so they don't close.
so they don't close.
Yeah. And this one, of course, like this is where things start to heat up. They're like watching the movie, but then they just kind of like lying facing each other, like knees touching, or like always having a body part touching. And then January starts freaking out. She's like, I have to go to the bathroom. And he's like, you just went pee. And she's like, I have a small bladder. And then they just kind of like, neither one of them want to make the first move, but they're like really close. And then Gus finally kisses her. And then she's like straddling him. They're like making out. And then they get kicked out, basically. Because
Like
it's a
true
family
teenage
establishment.
style.
Yeah. And then they leave. And then this part, chapter 15, makes me sad because I can't imagine like you're making out this guy that you had this crush on and things are finally starting to happen. And then he just left.
Yeah,
Like he
disappears
disappeared. He didn't say anything to
for
her.
days.
She for days and she's just spiraling and like
No explanation, no note,
yeah.
no nothing.
And she just starts writing her story, like starting to get like a little darker as like kind of the spiraling, like it was like happier and then now it's going darker. And then she had mentioned in previous chapters like she was starting to write Gus as like this like love interest guy in her story. And then she started changing his plot lines to like not a happy ending after he just like disappeared after they made out and without like trace, without anything. And I would be so pissed off if that was me.
Well,
Like I would be.
100%.
Yeah. And it's sad because it's like I feel like sometimes when you have those happy moments, then it just gets taken away by like this and like why did he just leave?
Miscommunication.
Yeah. And it just spirals her writing and changing and it starts the chapter then goes to like her she's doing like a book signing at the bookstore there and then we find out that Pete is actually his aunt,
My
his
favorite
mom's
part. I
sister.
literally gasped. I was like,
Yeah.
plot twist.
And a perfect auntie fashion, she's like spilling all the tea and she's just like, he really likes you, be patient with him. And she lets him know that the day that they met, it was his birthday, but like that's the day that his wife walked out on him or like asked for a divorce. And so she's like spiraling as she's like talking because her aunt thinks that like obviously if Gus is interested in this girl, she knows that he's divorced and all these things, and she's just spiraling in her head like, what? He's married, divorced, he was married, and like he loved someone, and this guy that's so cynical got married, and then he got divorced, and she left him, and she's like, what the hell? Because in her mind, he was always that cynical guy, but he's
Mhm.
like kind of worse. And that part confused her, but she just like can't fathom like how he became that guy that got married and then divorced.
Right, yeah.
That's and I
And
feel like
that the day that they met was the day like, was it finalized or was, like, served or something? Like,
no,
was
I think it's just like the anniversary of it. I don't think it was, or I don't I don't remember. I think it was just and I think it wasn't that because I think they said that his friend just always throws him a
Mhm.
big birthday because of that happened. And so she's freaking out, but she's like, Gus loves someone enough to marry them.
And
And
never have brought her up, never, like, mentioned anything about a
yeah,
previous marriage.
but she was kind of going slow and kind of respecting his pace. But then she's like, he loves someone enough to marry. Like he's so skeptical, but he married someone, but he made out with me and he just left. And so she's like spiraling because she's like, I don't get it. Like, why would he? We just kissed and I thought this was a great thing and he's gone. And that's the
Mhm.
end of chapter 15. And you're going to have to wait till next Monday to find out why Gus left. Don't be like Kendall and read ahead. Stick with us for the show.
It's juicy, you will wanna stay tuned. You will want to
And
know more.
I did skip ahead, not to be hypocritical, but I did read ahead because I have to figure out what happened.
Yeah, for sure. That's why I said I couldn't stop because I had to be like, "Oh gosh, every end is so good, I have to know what happens next."
Yeah. So, as always, we have these episodes every Monday. Next Monday, we will do chapters 16 through 20. They're going to be juicy and chaotic from what I read already, and I'm excited to talk about those. You could follow us on Two Girls with Grave Pod on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And we will have our actual podcast episode tomorrow if you're listening to this on Monday. And every Tuesday we release those episodes. And you can email us at twogirlswithgaypod with any comments, questions. We've been loving all the comments. Me and Kendall like send them back to each other. So we appreciate all the comments, people following along. And please rate and subscribe on our podcast so more people get to see our podcast. Because that's the only way it really starts to grow.
Yeah, help
Anything
us
else
find
we
other
left out?
grievers.
Yeah.
I don't think so, but this was a good section of the book, and I'm super excited for the next one.
Yeah, it's a super cute chapter. It made me feel like a teenage girl. So, where everything was simple
Feeling giddy again.
and everyone was still alive. Darked out. Okay, well, everyone, thank you for listening in and stay tuned tomorrow for our official episode.
Bye.
Bye.